Good evening, wherever you are, perhaps curled under a blanket, or letting the last hum of the day fade from your thoughts. Welcome. Tonight, you are invited into a quieter corner of history, one woven not with wars or monarchs, but with charm, imagination, and paperwork. This is the story of a man named Victor Lustig, a name that drifts through archives like the faintest scent of ink and cologne. He was not a king or a conqueror. He left no books, no buildings, no descendants to speak of. But what he did leave behind, or rather what he took, still lingers in quiet awe. On 1925, amidst the gentle clatter of cafe spoons and the cautious optimism of a post-war Paris, Lustig sold the Eiffel Tower. Not metaphorically, not as a joke, but with formal stationery, forged signatures, and the kind of elegance that made even lies feel dignified. And tonight, as your breath slows and your mind begins to loosen from the day, you will join us on a slow descent into that very world, a Paris of pigeons and polished shoes, of bureaucrats and junk tycoons, and of a man who convinced the city that the Eiffel Tower was for sale. Subscribe to the channel and let us begin. Let's begin with quiet, not silence, but that kind of soft, thoughtful quiet that settles over a city in the early morning, before traffic builds, before cafes open their doors fully, before the rush of routine returns. This is Paris, 1925, and Paris, in this moment, is not quite the city of light. It is something more delicate. It is a city recovering. It has been 7 years since the Great War ended. The war that changed not just borders, but people. The kind of war that etched new lines into maps and into faces. The kind that taught nations how fragile the idea of permanence could be. Paris had survived. Yes, it had endured the noise, the loss, the ache, and now it was dressing itself once again in silk, in jazz, in polite laughter that echoed just slightly too loud, like someone trying to convince themselves of a joke. Imagine walking through the city then, not the Paris of postcards, but the real one. The one with street sweepers whistling to themselves, with smoke from an early chimney curling up into the pale sky, with school children kicking stones along the curb. You pass cafes where chairs are being turned upright for the day. You hear the clink of bottles, the hum of bicycles, and the distant toll of church bells, the kind that blend with pigeons and perfume to create a kind of urban lullaby. The buildings are familiar, ornate, proud, but underneath the masonry there's a weariness, the kind of weariness that doesn't sleep, only learns to sit a little straighter, because Paris, though beautiful, is tired. The ministries are tired, full of officials shuffling forms across worn desks, tired of trying to balance post-war budgets, of arguing over whether to preserve or replace, to rebuild or reimagine. The people are tired too, tired of rationing, of remembering, of pretending that they don't remember. But they move forward, as people do, with lipstick, polished shoes, and the unspoken promise that things will feel normal again. soon. This is the mood into which our story slips, not with drama, not with fanfare, just a man, a plan, and a city not quite looking in his direction. Now, imagine a monument, tall, iron, latticed, familiar, the Eiffel Tower. You might see it now as the very symbol of France. But in 1925, that symbol was in question when Gustave Eiffel first constructed by it in 1889 for the World's Fair. Many Parisians despised it. They called it an eyesore, a mistake, a tragic lamppost. And while some eventually grew fond of it, others simply grew tired of paying for it. It was never meant to last. That's the part many forget. The tower was built with a 20-year permit, after which it was supposed to be dismantled and removed. But things, as they often do, changed. The tower had outlived its permit, outlasted its critics, and slowly become inconvenient. It required constant upkeep, maintenance, repainting, structural checks, all of which cost money the government didn't have. By 1925, rust curled like ivy along its legs. Birds nested undisturbed in its steel bones, and in quiet corridors of official buildings, behind closed doors and between sighs, the idea began. To drift, perhaps it should go. Perhaps it should be taken down, sold for scrap, quietly, nothing official, just whispers. But whispers, to the right ears, are as good as truth. And someone was listening. He was not a politician, not a businessman, not a journalist. He was Victor Lustig, a name that does not shake empires or fill textbooks, but one that would, in time, leave a different kind of mark. Lustig was not flamboyant. He did not wear diamonds or carry canes tipped with ivory. He dressed well, but not to impress. He spoke softly, but with that unmistakable air of someone who always seems to be the one explaining, never asking. He moved like mist, and like mist, he slipped into rooms without making a sound at this moment in history. He is seated in a quiet hotel room near the Place de la Concorde, the Hotel de Crillon, its marble corridors worn smooth by diplomats, barons, and the occasional artist with just enough inheritance to afford the lobby. He sits at a writing desk, not hunched, not hurried. Before him is a single sheet of paper on it, the letterhead of the French Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. The paper is thick, the seal embossed, the signature looping and precise. Everything about it says authority, and yet nothing on it is real. Lustig folds the paper gently, tucks it into an envelope, seals it with a wax stamp, and repeats the process. Not once, not twice, 6 times, 6 letters, 6 invitations, 6 men who, within days, will walk into the hotel expecting to participate in something historic, something lucrative, something exclusive. They are scrap dealers, salvage industrialists, men whose fortunes were built on the remains of others, railway lines, decommissioned ships, factory ruins, men with gold watches and thick fingers, and by the permanent scent of coal dust beneath their nails. They will be invited to bid discreetly. Of course, on the dismantling and sale of the Eiffel Tower, the government, the letters will explain, has decided quietly that the time has come. The tower has served its purpose. Its upkeep is too great, its value greater still, in pieces, and Lustig. He will host them professionally, formally, as Deputy Director of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. The title, like the suit he wears, fits him perfectly, because it never existed. But no one will question it, because the best lies, he knows, are built not on imagination, but on structure, on timing, on tone, and above all, on the very human fear of appearing uninformed. And so the stage is set. Paris distracted, rebuilding, hopeful but weary, will not notice the performance taking place behind one hotel door. And if they do, they will say nothing, because Paris is not yet watching, and Lustig knows that's the best time to act. Let us return now to the Hotel Disarmingly. It is early afternoon. Paris hums just outside the windows, the soft stir of wheels on stone, the occasional trill of a distant trumpet from across the river. Inside, the air is cooler, quieter, the kind of quiet that holds itself proudly, as if it were just another piece of the decor. Victor. Lustig stands in a private salon on the second floor. The walls are panelled in polished walnut. The chandelier above, crystal and brass, sways ever so slightly in the spring air. The curtains, heavy and maroon, have been drawn just enough to let in filtered sunlight, the kind that turns paper golden. On the table before him, neatly, arranged in a fan, are 6 letters. He adjusts one slightly, not because it's out of place, but because he's had time. He always allows himself time. There is no performance without patience, and this is most certainly a performance. Soon there will be guests, 6 of them, men whose names have circulated in the industrial journals, men who own entire depots of scrap iron and operate under company titles that suggest something more refined than what they are, because iron salvage does not sound as polite as materials acquisition. They are successful, though. Self-made, practical dot, and precisely the kind of men who never want to admit what they do not know. Which is why this scam, like all good scams, begins not with deception, but with invitation. Each man has received a letter on official government stationery. The paper is expensive, the ink dark and tidy, the language formal, professional, just ambiguous enough to avoid stating anything too clearly. The tone is that of quiet urgency. Each letter informs the recipient that the French Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs is considering a confidential project of national significance. That due to their reputation in the salvage industry, they have been pre-selected to review and potentially participate in this private bidding process. No cameras, no publicity, no mention in the press, just a meeting, just an opportunity. And so they come, they arrive in dark cars, each with a briefcase. They nod to the doorman, take the elevator with the quiet posture of men used to being led to private rooms. They are shown in by a hotel porter, and one by one they step into Lustig's office. He greets each man with the same understated grace, a firm handshake, a nod of recognition, a glance at the watch, as if to suggest he appreciates their punctuality. Then, after a moment, he offers them coffee. No champagne, nothing flashy, just professionalism. The men sit, and when the last one has arrived, he begins, slowly, calmly. Lustig explains that the Eiffel Tower, though loved, though admired, is no longer sustainable. The cost of its maintenance, its ongoing repairs, the growing corrosion across its iron beams, all of it has become an unacceptable burden on the state. He says this gently, almost with regret, as if he himself is a reluctant participant. He cites figures, pulls them from a printed dossier, aged with a touch of gray around the edges. He shows them blueprints, legitimate copies, though acquired through questionable channels, plays structural evaluations, cost breakdowns, government memos that reference internal decisions, all forged, all flawless. He explains that the French government has decided to dismantle the tower, discreetly, quietly, with the help of a firm that can handle the matter with elegance. They will not announce it to the press, not yet. The optics, he says, are delicate. The Eiffel Tower is loved, yes, but only in postcards. The reality is that it is a hulking relic, decaying in full view of the world. The men nod, because it sounds true, because it is the kind of truth they would expect to be hidden, because it flatters their insight, makes them feel as though they are finally being told what others are not. And that is the first trick of the con, to make the mark feel chosen. Lustig never overplays it. He doesn't rush. He lets them study the documents, lets them lean back in their chairs, lets them weigh the opportunity. He does not say that they are bidding on the Eiffel Tower. Instead, he suggests that the ministry will soon be seeking proposals for its removal and resale, and that their firm, among others, will be considered. The phrasing matters. Here is not selling. He is evaluating, and the room, slowly, begins to lean in. There is one man who leans further than the rest, Andre Poisson. He is the least experienced of the group, a man whose wealth has been recently acquired, whose hands are still adjusting to the weight of ownership. Poison is sharp, but not seasoned. Lustig sees it the nervous way. Poison scans the room, the way his eyes return, again and again, to the documents, the way he clears his throat before speaking, as though rehearsing for a performance that has already begun. After the group disperses, each man returning to their offices to review the offer, Lustig asks Poison to remain just for a moment. Poison agrees, almost too quickly. They sit once more. Lustig folds his hands. He lowers his voice slightly, just enough to suggest discretion. He leans forward and says, "You understand. This project is politically sensitive." Poison nods, unsure. "There are people in the press," Lustig continues, "and in rival ministries who may oppose this decision, who might claim that such a project should be more publicly vetted. Another pause, but with the right relationship, with the right reassurance, well, these matters move much more smoothly. He does not say the word bribe. He never says the word bribe. He lets it dangle, like the faintest perfume, just strong enough to notice, just faint enough to question. Poise shifts, then, slowly, he reaches into his coat pocket and removes a small envelope. It is slid across the table. WORDLESSLY. And just like that, the grift is complete. But Lustig does not gloat. He thanks Poison, offers him a receipt printed on the same forged stationery as the original letter. He tells him that he will be in touch, and then the next morning he leaves Paris. Not in a rush, not in disguise. He boards a train to the south of France. Alongside his mistress, their bags light, their faces calm. In his briefcase, the funds from the bribe, and the documents no longer needed. In his pocket, a schedule for future travel. In his mind, only quiet satisfaction. No headlines will follow. No questions will be asked, because Andre Poison will not speak. And Lustig knows this. He always did. Let's return, just briefly, to a moment of stillness. The salon at the Hotel de Crillon is empty now. The chairs are pushed in, the glasses cleared. The sunlight that once cut sharp across the velvet upholstery has faded to a softer amber pooling against the floorboards, as if reluctant to leave. No one here suspects what has just happened. No bellboy whispers to another. No concierge watches the elevator suspiciously. The hotel continues on, unbothered and unaware. Just as Victor Lustig intended, he is gone. The next morning, he boarded a train with the casualness of a man headed to a luncheon. There was no disguise, no false passport, no false name. He traveled as he was, Mr. Victor Lustig, confident, undisturbed, unremarkable. But back in Paris, something else lingers. Andre Poison, man whose shoulders have begun to feel heavier. Let's sit with him for a moment in the privacy of his office. A modest space on the second floor of a quiet building, where the curtains are thick and the air, despite the open window, feels strangely still. Poises sits at his desk. The Eiffel Tower dossier is open before him, his brow furrowed, his fingertips resting lightly on the edge of the table, as though afraid to press too hard and find that it all disappears. He rereads the documents, the ones Lustig gave him. They're flawless. The seals, the fonts, the ministry language, nothing appears. Off-dot, and yet something is wrong. Days pass. Poison writes a letter, discreetly, to a contact in the Ministry of Public Works. He phrases it carefully, a casual inquiry, a request for confirmation on a project he's heard. Whispers of, the response comes quickly. There is no project. The Eiffel Tower is not being dismantled. No deputy director by that name exists. Andre Poison feels his stomach turn, not with panic, not with outrage, with shame, because this was not just a financial loss. It was something deeper, more personal, more corrosive. He hadn't been forced. He hadn't been rushed. He had walked willingly, calmly, into a lie. And even worse, he had smiled as he did. That is the true genius of Lustig's deception. It did not feel like a trick. It felt like a privilege. And when it was gone, it did not collapse with drama. It evaporated. Poison has a choice. He could report it. He could contact the police. He could issue a statement and face the headlines, the gossip, the whispers in his professional circles. But he DOS'd because sometimes exposure feels like a second wound. And so, like the papers on his desk, he folds it away, neatly, privately. He says nothing, and in doing so, he becomes the final piece of the grift, the quiet guarantee that no one will come looking. Victor Lustig understood this perfectly. Shame, he believed, was the most dependable silence in the world. And now, with no one pursuing him, no warrant, no trail, he finds himself free and validated because to Lustig, this was never a one-time trick. It was a blueprint, a successful experiment. He had tested the market, executed the sale, and measured the result. And the result was silence. So he returns. Yes, returns. Weeks later, Lustig steps once more into the lobby of the Hotel des Crillon, looking every bit the official he had been before. No one questions him. Why would they? The world has not noticed his absence. He rents the same salon, orders the same tray of biscuits and coffee, prints a new round of forged documents, improved, refined, the grammar made slightly more formal, the stamps just a shade more aged, and again the letters go out. New names, new invitations, new hopes, and again they come. They arrive in the same dark cars, sit in the same velvet chairs, read the same government forms, and once more they believe, until slowly, gently, something shifts. One man, only one, pauses. Perhaps it's a word, a tone, a name on a document that doesn't match the register. He does not raise his voice. He does not cause a scene. He simply makes a phone call to a friend in the ministry. Just checking something, he says. Nothing urgent, just a detail. The answer comes softly. There is no such project. There is no such official. And the Eiffel Tower is as ever still standing. And so the ripple begins. Not a wave, not a scandal. Just a ripple. A quiet awareness that something has gone wrong. A note passed discreetly to a superior. A file marked suspicious. A conversation behind a closed door. Victor Lustig senses it, because those who trade in silence know when it is about to break. He leaves Paris again, but this time there is no pause, no lingering in the south of France, no cafes, no champagne that's time. He boards a ship and crosses an ocean to a country that does not yet know his name, the United States, where optimism was currency, and questions were considered impolite. where fortunes were built in the space between truth and what people wished to be true, and where, once again, he would build his illusion, brick by forged brick. But Paris remembers him. Not officially, not in legal documents or public records, but in the quiet, in the whispered jokes, between civil servants, in the way scrap dealers looked twice at official envelopes, in the knowledge, never confirmed, never denied, that once someone had sold the Eiffel Tower and had gotten away with it. Let us cross the ocean now, quietly, slowly, as Lustig himself did, in a first-class cabin aboard an ocean liner bound for New York. The water is calm, the ship gentle in its movement. Somewhere below deck, a jazz trio plays softly to the scattered crowd in the lounge, their chords echoing faintly through the walls. He stands near the railing, hands folded behind his back, watching the horizon as the Statue of Liberty approaches. A symbol, yes, but also an opportunity, because in America, belief comes in a different shape. In Paris, it is cautious, elegant, earned through reputation. In New York, in the 1920s, it is hungry, open, eager to be filled. And Victor Lustig, stepping onto American soil for the first time, already knows this. But he is not the only one. Let us now meet a man with a different name, but a familiar skill, George C. Parker. Unlike Lustig, Parker was born into America, a New Yorker through and through. His manner was more casual, more familiar, his scams less polished, but no less brilliant. Parker understood something essential about the American dream, that it could be shaped, sold, and stamped with a signature, even if the paper it was printed on wasn't real. He didn't wear fine silk or travel with mistresses. He didn't need hotels with chandeliers or government seals. What he needed was just one thing, your trust, and he would earn it with a smile. Parker's greatest triumph, and perhaps the most astonishing echo of Lustig's Eiffel Tower scheme, was the repeated sale of the Brooklyn Bridge. Yes, repeated because he didn't sell it once, or even twice. He sold it many times. The story begins at the foot of the bridge itself, massive, majestic, a marvel of engineering built in the late 19th century. It connected Manhattan to Brooklyn in a grand sweep of suspension cables and stone towers. To the average newcomer, especially an immigrant freshly arrived, it looked not only impressive, but somehow Purcasable, and Parker made sure they believed it. He would meet his marks in bars, pay train stations. Along the waterfront, they were often newly arrived, hopeful, uncertain, carrying their savings in their coats and their futures in their eyes. And Parker would find them. He would introduce himself as a city official, or as the man charged with handling the quiet insider sales of municipal property. He'd wear a bowler hat, carry a portfolio, and speak with a tone of restrained familiarity, the kind that suggested that you were lucky to be speaking with him. Then he would say something like, "The city is trying to offload some of its assets. Infrastructure, mostly. Quiet sales. nothing public. The Brooklyn Bridge, for example. They're looking for private toll collectors, reliable men. You seem like the type. Think about it. 10,000 people a day crossing. That's income. That's ownership. That's legacy. He would open his case. Inside papers. Always papers. Deeds. Transfer contracts. Tax stamps. Letters of recommendation from fictitious departments. All forged. All precise. The price. Reasonable. The reward. Immeasurable. And so they bought these men. These dreamers. They bought the Brooklyn Bridge, and the next morning they would return to it with wooden booths, with paint, with signs, ready to begin their new enterprise, until, inevitably, the police arrive and gently, with great confusion, explained the truth. The bridge had not been sold. It had never been for sale. The deed was a lie, the promise a fiction, and the man who made it gone. But Parker didn't just sell the bridge. He sold grants. Tomb, Madison Square, Garden, the Statue of Liberty, anything with grandeur, anything that looked like it belonged to someone else. Because, to Parker, that meant it could belong to anyone. If the paperwork was convincing enough, he was arrested. Yes, several times. He even went to prison. But the most remarkable part, he kept coming back. Because for men like Parker and Lustig, the con wasn't merely about money. It was about control, about narrative, about stepping into someone's reality and bending it just slightly until they handed it over willingly. And in this way, both men lived in the architecture of belief. They understood that structures, whether steel towers or suspension, bridges are not held together only by bolts and beams. They are held together by faith. The faith that governance function, that papers speak truth, that some things, by their sheer size or symbolism, are beyond doubt. And it is precisely there, in that sacred silence of assumption, that con artists flourish, because the Eiffel Tower, in its towering grace, seemed too sacred to touch, and the Brooklyn Bridge, with its flags and traffic, seemed too public to be personal. But both were for a moment owned not by legal titles, but by confidence, by belief, and as the years pass, as headlines fade and cityscapes evolve, these stories remain not in museums or monuments, but in whispered retellings, in the knowing smile of a stranger on a park bench, in the quiet chuckle of someone folding a letterhead that feels just too official. Because scams, when done well, do not end in arrest. They end in reflection. They settle into the cultural memory like dreams absurd, delightful, vaguely impossible, and that is where we leave them. To men, to cities. To impossible sails, and one undeniable truth. If you know how to say it gently enough, someone will always believe you. And so we arrive at the end of our story, not with a bang, not with scandal or sirens or the clang of a gavel, but with a quiet step, a closing of a briefcase, a train departing softly into mist. The man who sold the Eiffel Tower disappears, not forever, but for long enough long enough that his name fades from the lips of the public, long enough that the documents are filed, then forgotten, long enough that no one quite knows how to explain what happened, only that, for a moment, it did. It's tempting, isn't it, to look back and shake our heads, to wonder how could they have believed it? How could anyone be fooled into buying a national monument? But belief is not a weakness. It is a structure, as solid as necessary, and as carefully constructed as the Eiffel Tower itself. And sometimes belief is so elegant that we forget to ask who built it. Victor Lustig built belief. So did George C. Parker. They knew how to find the spaces between assumptions, the shadows between what we know and what we're too polite or too proud to question. They didn't need violence. They didn't even need lies, really. They only needed confidence, that gentle, polished tone, that forged letterhead, that familiar shape of bureaucracy, that comforting sound of things being handled. They made reality feel official, and then they walked away, with a tip of the hat, with a new train ticket, with a grin not of malice, but of mastery. They understood something that still lingers, even now, that the world, for all its rules and locks and ledgers, is often held together by something far more fragile than law. It is held together by trust, by repetition, by familiarity, and in the hands of a gifted storyteller. That trust becomes clay, moldable, shapeable, and, in the quietest of rooms, saleable. So tonight, as you rest, let these tales drift softly into your dreams, not as nightmares, but as lullabies, lullabies for grown minds, for the part of you that wonders how much of what we see is truly owned, truly real, truly safe from imagination. Because in the end, Lustig didn't just sell the Eiffel Tower, and Parker didn't just sell the Brooklyn Bridge. They sold a feeling. They sold a dream of access, of privilege, of being chosen to see behind the curtain, and for a moment, just one shining, delicate moment, their marks believed it, as we all do sometimes. So sleep now, not worried, but wonder-filled. The world, after all, is not only what is true, it is also what is beautifully, convincingly, almost true. And there is comfort, strange as it may seem, in knowing that even the boldest cons are still just stories, with letters, and stamps, and the soft sound of footsteps disappearing into history. Good night, we single quotes, LL meet again soon.